Welcome to another talk from Gisborne Christian Fellowship. We're looking at good news. This section we've called Jesus Hears, but strangely we start with a chapter which recalls an account of a blind man being healed. The man's name was Bartimaeus. I'll read the section. It's from the book of Mark, chapter 10, verses 46 to 52. At that time, Jesus, just to give you a little bit of background, was making his way across country to Jerusalem, where they were going to celebrate a Jewish festival called the Passover meal. So he was making his way into Jericho and then out of Jericho on that road there. So then it says, "And they came to Jericho, as Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city. A blind man, Bartimaeus, which means son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.' Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' Jesus stopped and said, 'Call him.' So they called to the blind man, 'Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you.' Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. 'What do you want me to do for you?' Jesus asked him. The blind man said, 'Rabbi, I want to see.' 'Go,' said Jesus, 'your faith has healed you.' Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. In the middle of that passage we find people trying to silence Bartimaeus. But why? After all, he had a bigger need than the able-bodied people around him who were already following Jesus. As some of you already know, the Bible is separated into two parts. The Old Testament, which tells us about the Jewish world and their history from the beginning, and the New Testament, which deals with the life of Jesus and how he challenged and changed the old ways of thinking and brought a new way of living and being friends with God, who created us all. But why the hostility towards blind people? There's many Old Testament passages that explain many things, but there's several concerning people who were blind, which gives us an insight into how blindness was viewed and treated during that period of their history. Throughout the Old Testament, God instructed his people to not mistreat those who were blind. He wouldn't have had to do that if they were being treated with respect. So that's where it all fell down. They were classed as outcasts and pushed aside. As Christians, we are called to treat everyone with respect. You see, during Jesus' time, this lack of respect wasn't confined to blindness. Deafness, lameness was also viewed in a less than favourable way. So let's go a little bit further with Bartimaeus. Here he was, probably sat begging at the same place where he had sat perhaps for many years. What tended to happen, you see, was someone would lead him to his spot and leave him with a small amount of food and water. But that was his day. People would speak as they passed, quite possibly unkindly, and hopefully some would leave a few coins so he could pay for food. It was an existence. So when Jesus came passing by and Bartimaeus heard the crowd, they were unable to suppress his shouts. He wasn't going to miss out on this opportunity of a lifetime, an opportunity to see the world as other people saw it around him. So Bartimaeus shouted for all it was worth. They've called this presentation Good News. Jesus hears, and Bartimaeus was going to be heard. But one voice in so many. Unlike you and I, Jesus was aware of Bartimaeus. He knew him even though he'd never met him. He knew of Bartimaeus' plight, although he had never seen him. How? Well, Jesus, after all, is the Son of God. And it does have some perks. Jesus knows what the future holds for each one of us. Not just Bartimaeus. There are many examples of Jesus knowing the future. Where, for instance, was the food coming from to feed the 5,000? Or where to find a colt for his ride into Jerusalem? Or again, where he was going to celebrate the Passover meal with his friends? These were not pre-planned by his followers. Read the accounts. The disciples couldn't believe it themselves when these things happened. These instances were Jesus in action. So that day Jesus heard the cry of Bartimaeus, and Bartimaeus was healed. Bartimaeus could finally view the world. How does that account help us today, in a world where people are just too busy to listen to anyone, never mind the quiet voice of God? See, God doesn't force himself into our world. We have to ask him in. We are supposed to be a caring society, but society doesn't give us much time to care for ourselves, never mind others. Or does it? Sometimes we make a rod for our own back. It's an old saying, but we sometimes give ourselves things to do that maybe we actually don't need to. It's a lifestyle thing, and it's a lifestyle we lead. So I'm going to give you a few statistics. Who doesn't like a statistic or two? Did you know, for instance, Mr. and Mrs. Average check their mobile phones 344 times per day? That equates to about once every 4 minutes. Don't check your phone, by the way. If your phone rings, that's possibly something important. Facebook, Twitter and Instagram aren't really that important. They really aren't. Also, statistics tell us that television is the next culprit for using up our time. In this instance, you ladies fare better than us men. On average, men spend 3 hours and 19 minutes watching television, and women only spend 2 hours and 34 minutes a day. That begs the question, when do we have time to sleep? If we're working, watching all that television, looking at our phones, do we have time for anything else? So the lesson here is, let's make time for each other. But more importantly, let's make time for God. You see, Jesus is waiting for your Bartimaeus moment. That moment when you realise you need more than the world can offer or provide, and you call out for his help. Bartimaeus knew what he wanted. He wanted to be able to see, and he called out to Jesus, knowing Jesus was the only chance he had of changing his life. Does that not ring a few bells with all of us? Does some of us not want or need a life change? But what did Bartimaeus do once he regained his sight? He followed Jesus. Bartimaeus knew this man, his Saviour, was worth following. You see, Bartimaeus had not only gained his sight, he had been given a new life. He now had a new status. He had gained respect. He didn't have to beg anymore. He didn't have to take the insults people would hand out to him as a beggar. And he didn't have to rely on people's generosity to buy food for the next day. Bartimaeus now had a life, not just an existence. And Jesus had given him all that for free. I'm going to read from Psalm 116 verses 1 and 2, and these words are so poignant for Bartimaeus but also for us. And it says, I love the Lord, for he heard my voice. He heard my cry for mercy, because he turned his ear to me. Because he's listening. He's listening for you. I will call on him as long as I live. See, Jesus is listening for you today. Will you have a Bartimaeus moment and call out to him for help? Do you want a change in your life? Do you want to see things like Bartimaeus did in a different way? He was given his sight, but maybe you just need your eyes opening to possibilities that you never knew existed. What can I say? Apart from, have a great week, and God bless you all. Bye.